exam's going to begin. I'm just going to pick on people like Ringo, Bruce Van Testament, etc. I'd like to pick on him. And you fold up on a piece of paper, there's a word in there that somebody else in this crowd has written down. Just one sentence to describe that word. You can, it's not like it's Pictionary that you can't say a word that's on a piece of paper, but it's something that straight away comes to mind when you read that word. So we'll start with somebody easy. I will start picking on that Chris. Tusk. Tusk, okay, what comes first to mind?
Just preserving.
Fantastic. I'm going to pick on somebody else. I'm going to pick on Bill. Longevity. Okay, what comes to mind?
Yeah, brilliant.
Now I'm going to pick on Martin.
Horns and obviously poaching.
Very good. What I'm going to do, I'm actually going to hand over the floor to Luc, and he will take it from there, and he probably wants to test a few more of you. Luc, over to you.
We'll come back and test guys a little bit more later, but first of all, thanks very much, Suzanne. And on behalf of Robin, Suzanne, and I, welcome tonight, and thank you all very, very much indeed for taking time out to come and be with us. We've been in Perth here for probably a month, some of us even longer, and really got into the whole vibe of things here, and can certainly attest to the fact that aside from that festive period, you guys are a serious bunch of working people here. I look at my two brothers, and they seem to work 12 hours a day, and yeah, it's really great that you guys have taken time out. We're going to do some more thanks as we come to the end of the presentation, because they're obviously people that have made this possible tonight, and without them we wouldn't have been able to do this. So thank you very, very much. My name is Luke Brown. I'm one of the co-founders of the Zambesia Conservation Alliance, together with my wife Suzanne and Robin, who some of you or most of you may have met either now or prior to coming here. We founded this organization on the back of a passion that we have, like I think most of you in this room, because you wouldn't be here otherwise, for conservation and our wild spaces. We are based in Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, and that is at the epicenter of one of the world's most incredible biospheres. It's home to 4 ecoregions, and it's home to the largest remaining population of African elephants on the planet. So let's zoom in and just have a quick look at Zambesia, which is a pre-colonial term that was used by explorers 300-400 years ago to describe a region that stretches basically across the catchment area of the Zambezi River, from Namibia on the west coast right through to Mozambique on the east coast, and all those countries in between. So that dark shaded area on there represents over 1 million square kilometers of land that forms Zambesia, and the brighter colored patches are some of the national parks. And now it extends well beyond that, because we haven't included a lot of the private game parks and private initiatives that are going on. But essentially it's a very, very vast piece of land. And it seemed right to us to use a term that is neutral for all people. And Zambesia is not something that was started by us, but we certainly are helping to coin the term again for this area. Now, as I mentioned, it is home to some very significant wildlife, but also communities that all draw their lifeblood from the Zambezi River. I just want to hone in a little bit on these incredible animals here. As we all know, are elephants. But if any of you know about megafauna, megafauna are animals that are 40 kilograms and more. And if you go into the Megafauna Conservation Index, just Google it if you want to, you will see in there that out of the top 10 countries in the world for conservation of megafauna, 7 out of 10 of those countries are in Africa, and 4 out of 10 are actually in the Zambesia region. So number 1 is Namibia, number 2 is Botswana, number 5 is Zimbabwe, and the other one that's in there, which is part of this region, is Zambia, and that comes in at number 8. And then there's a few other countries in Africa like Rwanda and Central African Republic. And then outside of Africa, you've only got Norway, Canada, and I think Bhutan. Now, I'm in tourism, but I studied zoology and I studied megafauna, African vertebrates. And I can tell you that in my experience, and certainly if you go into the literature, conservation is obviously not just about conserving megafauna, but it's seen as an umbrella term for conservation, and particularly when it comes to biodiversity. Because if we conserve megafauna, we conserve vast tracts of land, because the very nature of these animals is they're big and they need big home ranges. So that's why we're honing in on the elephants. Over 150,000 elephants roam Zambesia today. Quite incredible to think. The biggest populations of those are in Botswana and Zimbabwe, but there's a number across the other countries in that area as well. So what we find with conservation is people tend to refer to animals. So I'm bringing up animals, but actually if we don't look after the habitat, we can't look after the animals. We're going to talk more about that and how that resonates with what we are hoping to achieve with Zambesia. We started this in COVID. April 2020, Suzanne, Robin and I sat down in Victoria Falls. We looked at our dwindling tourism numbers and we said, oh my goodness, what the hell are we going to do now? Because we all have tourism businesses. And we got really, really concerned. Not so much actually for ourselves, but for what may happen to this area, which is funded largely by tourism. In some cases, you'll hear more about our partners, but in some cases, some of our partners pre-COVID were funded 80-90% through tourism. And so when the bottom fell out, we said, well, what can we do? Now, we're not frontline. We don't have a background in frontline conservation. We're not out there anti-poaching every day. We're not out darting and fixing animals like vets do or educating communities. But we do have a creative streak and we do have a fairly strong network. And we saw a chance for us to help and plug in and hopefully make a difference. One of the, and again, this will come out more, but I'll just touch on it briefly. Conservation in Africa is very much operating in silos, and sadly what you're seeing is all the goodwill in the world. You're ending up with individual pockets, people competing for funding because traditional funding comes in that way, and once I've got my donor, I'm sure as hell I'm not going to tell the guy on the next door property about that. And it ends up becoming an unfortunate situation whereby some of the biggest fights we've seen have been between conservation people who have all the right intentions, but they're trying to hide things from each other. So it gave birth to the idea of an alliance, the Zambesia Conservation Alliance. Broad landscape approach, biting off probably more than we can chew, and recognizing that this is not something just for us, but something for everybody to participate in. So what we're trying to achieve is to set up a framework that those that care can plug into, and hopefully make conservation not the boring academic thing that everybody thinks it may be, and turn it into something a little bit cooler than that. So just at this point, when we started in April 2020, we wanted to kind of announce ourselves with a bit of a bang, and we came up with an idea called the Conservation Games. Some of you may have seen it. And there's a few people on there that we want to thank who believed in us right from the start and came forward and helped us make that happen. In addition, the two names at the top were not so much part of the Conservation Games, but they saw what we were doing and helped us as well. So Lord William Hague, former leader of the Conservative Party in the UK, and chairman of the Royal Foundation and United for Wildlife, which is the foundation of the Prince of Wales, Prince William, of which we are a partner in. Lieutenant Colonel Simon Hoare, the lead composer of the UK marching bands, composed the music that was playing just now as you sat down, is our theme song for Zambesia. Ian McIntosh, those of you who know rugby, don't think I need to introduce him. He helped us really kick off the Conservation Games. He brought in 4 former Springbok captains and numerous players. Andy Flower, I mean, these guys, legends in cricket and people that we're privileged to know, and helped us. And of course, all the men and women of the Conservation Games that took part. Chris Falgate over there was part of it, one of Zimbabwe's finest triathletes. So thanks very much for coming, Chris. Sometimes it's a little bit better to get others to tell you what we're trying to achieve than us trying to spin it ourselves. So, hugely respected person, some of you may know him, Richard Marsdorp, one of the elders of conservation, one of the people that we respect most in frontline conservation in Africa, part of the Zambezi Society. That's what he has to say. And he has helped enormously, and you'll hear more about one of the projects that we're working on with him. I mentioned Lord Hague, the guy doing a lot of the work for the Royal Foundation and United for Wildlife is Robert Campbell. There's a picture there of Robin, myself, and Sally Ann Follett-Smith. We'll talk about just now, but she is a huge part of our team. She's one of the directors in Zambesia Conservation Alliance, but that was in July, Rob. July, we were in London. Sorry, October. Yeah. Beg your pardon. In October, we were in London for the United for Wildlife Global Summit, and we were privileged to be addressed in a small room, much the same as this one, by Prince William, not long after his grandmother had died. But, you know, biodiversity is now becoming a term on the same level as global warming. It may even become more important in terms of terms that you hear about. And the fact that you have someone like Prince William championing United for Wildlife shows you how serious it is. Illegal wildlife trade, by the way, is in the top 5 criminal activities in the world now, after drug smuggling, illegal human trafficking, terrorism. And quite often those syndicates are all working together on illegal wildlife trade as well. So we're on a hiding here, guys. And we've got work to do. So who makes up the alliance? As I mentioned, we don't profess to be the front line, and this is an alliance. It's a grouping of people, and we've broadly categorized this into three audiences, or three types of groups that work within the alliance. The first is the outreach partners, and they're the most obvious because they're the ones who actually are on the front line, and examples of the type of organizations that are there. We've particularly focused in on private initiatives that do not have much voice internationally, yet they're doing incredible work, and we'll talk more about some of them. But then we've got strategic partners. And strategic partners can be anyone. It could be one of you sitting here. There's nothing too small or too big about a strategic partner. And we'll show you a framework that we're working on where you may think this could be an area where you could plug in or support or help. And then the ZCA facilitators, someone's got to try and bring it all together, and our team falls into that role. We have a number of people now working for ZCA. A number of people have just literally just given up. They're not coming into this for money because there's no money to pay them. They're coming into this because they love it, and they believe in the vision, they believe in an overarching vision, they believe in working together. Okay, so here's just a list of some of the outreach partners and the strategic partners, just to give you an idea. Victoria Falls Anti-Poaching Unit, it's an easy one to talk about. Charles Brightman, unsung hero of Victoria Falls, out every single day, scouting, picking up snares, engaging in contact with poachers. Very often, it's a thankless job. And he does not have time to tell people about what he's doing. He's out there trying to make a difference every day. And you just go in and look at the statistics of what he and his team achieves. And he lost a member of his team not so long ago in an awful incident. But that's just one example out of multiple here, and there's stories like that out of each and every one of them. And there's loads more that can be outreach partners as well. Strategic partners, I've spoken about the Royal Foundation. Grateful to have Damien here this evening, who's been working a lot with focused conservation. They work a lot on sort of forensic side, if I should say. Probably not describing it right, but a lot on the legal wildlife trade and trying to find the links and where the criminals are. Because don't forget, it's not just the poacher that's far down the chain. There's the big guys at the top that are conducting all of this. Speak Out for Animals is a group of lawyers based in Harare that are dedicated to representing our outreach partners when they face legal challenges. Our space, regenerative space, Craig Beach, Robin's going to talk more about him just now, and the work that he's doing with GIS systems and mapping biodiversity data. EY, Ernst & Young, who came on board with us right from the start, saw what we were doing and said, we will audit you guys, we will make sure that we give you a stamp of approval. And then there's various media groups and so on. Please, at any time, if you want to look up this stuff, Zambesia.com. Just remember, Zambesia is spelled with an S, Z-A-M-B-E-S-I-A, not with a Z, like the Zambezi River. So let's go on to the frameworks. Maybe, hopefully you're starting to get a little bit of a picture about what we're trying to do and achieve, but maybe this graphic helps. The top of the hourglass or funnel system, channel system, is support coming in. The bottom is trying to tell you, the support, what's going on the ground. And I mentioned the example of Charles Brightman. You know, he doesn't have time to go and fight Western narratives of Africa and what's going on in conservation, as well-intentioned as someone who wants to just look after one elephant. It's not the real story that we need to paint. So we need to amplify what's really happening, find a way to assess what all the common needs are of all these partners doing the work on the front line, represent them clearly and honestly to the support, and then help the support to find its way back to the front line. So that's what we're trying to achieve. And amplifying the needs, I spoke about the conservation games. That was one way to raise awareness about what's going on, but in a fun way that people can resonate with. We've done other campaigns, we've got movements, we've got Facebook groups, we're posting things, there's all kinds of stuff. You can find out all about that on zambesia.com. Robin is going to go into the financial channel, which is really important. We've set up in the US, we've set up in the UK, we've set up in Mauritius. We're trying to find the best ways for money to be able to come into Africa and get to where it needs to go quickly, efficiently, and without losing a whole lot of it along the way. So I'll go on from that now. I've spoken about the frontline amplification, and I just would like to show you a little video here. So mentioned the conservation games, and it was incredible because we had, during COVID, all these sports people sitting at home. They couldn't get out and train or coach or whatever they were doing. And so we managed to get them on Zoom and so on. And then we were like, we've got to do an awards. And so we held this awards evening at the Victoria Falls Hotel in the Livingston Room. It was a wonderful event. John Rennie, captain of the Elephants team, receiving the trophy, a beautiful silver rolled pangolin set on a piece of driftwood made by Patrick Mavros and donated entirely for this. So enjoy the video, it's not very long.
Hello everyone, it's Beast here, and I just want to say I pledge my support for the Conservation Games. It's a great cause indeed. God bless.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on another episode. We've got an absolute legend with us, Joel Stransky. We're going to be talking about the Conservation Games. Thank you for coming on board, Joel.
Great initiative, and as I said, you know, it's wonderful to be part of something that's a little different, that's doing a lot for a great cause and making a proper difference.
When you land back in Africa, whether it's Zimbabwe or whether it's Botswana or whether it's Namibia or South Africa, and you get that smell of the earth and the bird song and the peace of the bush, it's something absolutely magnificent. And I think we've got a duty to make sure that our children and their children can experience the same thing that we have.
So how many voices did you recognize? Anybody recognize the first voice? Beast. Sorry, I just got to get this back on. Anybody recognize anyone else there? Joel Stransky. Nick Mallet.
What about the visuals? Anyone notice a soccer player in there somewhere? Bruce Grobler.
Bruce
Yeah.
Jungleman Grobler. We were so fortunate to have all these people involved, and it just showed how much they care and about what we all care about in this room, which is making sure that we've got wild spaces to go back to and communities that benefit from them. I'm going to hand over to Robin at this juncture
Dangerous.
and let him delve into a bit more detail and take it from there. Okay with that?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Right, thanks, Luke. Yeah, wonderful picture painting that's been done. So obviously there's a lot of organizations around the world that are set up to fund conservation. Anyone name a few? Damien, what's the first one that comes to mind? Focus Conservation. Maeve? WWF, very good. Any others? At the back? BT? Yeah, never heard of those. Yeah, so they're out there, and there's some wonderful organizations, and they're doing an incredible job. Many of them, however, tend to come out of the West, and they mean good. They do a wonderful job, and they raise substantial funding. A lot of them are quite animal rightist, and then there are a lot of others that focus on pure conservation and biodiversity communities and so on. What we felt is that there is a need to look from the inside out rather than be across there in the West or here in Aussie or whatever, and looking in and saying these guys must be suffering with these problems. This is why there's an issue. We spend our life the last 30 years working in the safari industry and benefiting from wildlife. Canoeing the river, I've been very, very fortunate. I won't lie, I've just had the most incredible time. 30 years spending time canoeing on the river, rafting on the river, walking safaris around the river. So, when COVID came along, Luke, Suzanne and I just said, look, what can we do? And we wrote a list out of all the incredible organizations that are on the ground doing this incredible work. Luke talked about some of them. And, the list just goes on. You run out of ink. So we said, okay, we've got to focus on an area, but we've got to tell their story. We've got to, really understand what they're trying to do and so on. So there's a job, and we're only at the beginning, and we need help. We don't know, we don't have all the answers, but we felt that there was a need to grow something from within and take it out to these markets where unfortunately the influence and so on around the world is placed not so much in the wildlife areas. It's elsewhere, and the decisions get made out there. We also decided that although there is an absolute need to continue the stick approach, the anti-poaching work and so on, you can't stop that. It would create a vacuum. There's a need to look at the carrot approach, which is creating value chains. If we are still performing anti-poaching like we are now, in 20 years' time, there's a good chance we've lost the game. So, what can we do? We have to try and create a much firmer carrot method to provide the communities that are the custodians of these areas with the opportunity to benefit from them. Now, carbon has set the pace on that. And there's more that needs to be done. But like we were talking about earlier on, there's a new approach. We're starting to see it come out of COP. We're seeing it come out of forward-thinking MBA students that are getting involved, and finance that, hang on, it's more than carbon. It's biodiversity. Green bonds. So let's focus on species, elephants, rhinos. They're crucial, but they've got to feed on something. And if we continue to suffer with the human-wildlife conflict statistics that we are, it's only going to get worse. We're seeing a hard line between agriculture and conservation. If we don't create this value chain and do it fast over the next 10, 15 years, unfortunately, do I press the right-hand arrow here, Luke? Yeah. Okay. All right, so that just sort of, that's what I'm going to carp on a little bit about in my section here. This is a little bit about the team that we've built in a short period of time. We found that this sort of narrative, this sort of discussion has picked up quite a few forward-thinking people, and obviously we're very proud to have kicked this off. But like I say, I mean, it's only just the start gun. It's just gone. We can still hear it ringing in our ears. Sally Ann Follett-Smith, a lady who spent time working in tourism and conservation in Botswana, has joined our team. Felix Mungai, also from worked with Karma in the Botswana government, has joined our team. Alan Sparrow, some of you may have heard this name, incredible history from the Sparrow family that originally owned Malalangwe and set up that incredible property, Lone Star at the time it was called. Nick Home, who's been a champion of ours right from the beginning. Simbongeni, who now works in our data hub, early stages in Victoria Falls. Tim Wetmore, an old family friend who's heading up the work in the US. Life Gwazani, who's a lot of that editing and work and so on. He's been doing that, working closely with Luke. Greg Robinson, some of you might remember this character, larger than life in a few different ways, but his photography, he's come on board and he's based in Mauritius now, so he's helping us out. Craig Beach, we're going to talk more about, and Raymond Swart, who all this graphic work and web design. These guys have come on sides early. So with that team, we've been busy. We realized, first of all, that there's all these names of people that need help. My goodness, and we had to actually stop. And we've been remiss in not communicating enough with our outreach partners. We've been fortunate to win a couple of things with a few of them, but we realized that what we need to do is take a breath and set up some infrastructure so that we can go out and talk nicely, but we've actually got to have the infrastructure to channel the funding and the people to monitor that funding so it goes to the right places. And what we realized is that, it's not a part-time job. We're going to need to actually raise some funds ourselves to cover our costs. We're talking about retaining 10% of the funds that we raise to cover the costs for our team and the various infrastructures that we're putting in place. We can come back to some of these with some of you after if you'd like to learn more about them. Some of the areas that we're currently active on the ground with some funding. We've won an IUCN grant with the Savannah Conservation Trust, and we're active in the Kazuma Forest area. If you're not aware where that is, it's part of that sort of... Has anyone heard of Kaza? Who has heard of Kaza? K-A-Z-A. Damien, you've heard of it. Okay, so Kaza. Kaza is this have you heard of the Transfrontier National Parks, TFCAs? Okay, so Kaza is the largest and most successful TFCA in Africa. And its epicenter is Victoria Falls. It covers 5 countries. And it's really, Zambesia extends beyond that, but Kaza is at the center. And Kazuma is part of an elephant dispersal zone within the Kaza. Kaza, it's a crazy name, but it stands for Kavango Zambezi. So the guys at Peace Park said, what are we going to call it? The conservation guys, let's call it Kaza. So yeah, Kaza is what it is. Actually a wonderful story behind it, and I would suggest all of you should, obviously you're interested in conservation, learn a bit more about what's happening in the Kaza area. Don't confuse it with Gaza. So we've got a fire management program happening in there. We've got an elephant dispersal program, and obviously very much linked to communities. We've got a project running with MFCI actually, which has Perth origins. It's a very recent project that we've taken on to help create a baseline study for forestry areas through Kaza in Zimbabwe. We have a project taking place in the lower Zambezi Valley, where we are representing Zimbabwean interests in a project together with Peace Parks and African Wildlife Foundation to establish a partnership with the Department of National Parks and a co-management plan in that vast area down there. So we have some traction. Two of the areas that I've been very focused on is and this is in line the point that Luke alluded to, which is we met all these outreach partners, and many of them were sort of felt like the guy next door, you didn't want to tell him too much and so on. But I'm looking at you, Daniel, because data, what we realized is a lot of these guys are collecting data, and they're not sharing it. They're getting their funding in. It's coming in, very often from a AWF, WWF, I4, if you've heard of them. It's coming in, and they're sort of saying back to those guys, okay, we've bought the 4 tires you gave us the money for. But what's not really happening is this data is not being used to measure the work that these guys are doing out there. And that can't be done in isolation. It's got to be done in a landscape basis. So there's a lot of data being captured. An initiative that we are involved with is running a pilot project in the Zim part of Kaza to take multiple data sets, overlap them, get an academic team to come in, assess that the data that we're capturing is relative, obviously, to biodiversity measurements, and then putting it through a system where this Craig Beach, it's a name you might remember from earlier on in Luke's discussion there, but this chap, he spent 12 years working with Peace Parks, has come on and joined our team, although he still obviously has his own entity, but he's spending a lot of time working with us to design this biodiversity data valuation for validation. I'm going to look at it a little bit closer now. So then we're also looking at just starting an education hub in Victoria Falls, starting small, but basically bringing academics from overseas, the likes of Wild Crew and so on, Oxford, we've talked to them, Southern African Wildlife College, African Leadership University, bringing them into the falls. At the moment, what's happening on an academic side with conservation is you've got a lot of these international organizations coming in, studying, and taking the data back to Oxford, Cambridge, Perth, wherever it may be. They get their grants over here, over there, whatever. They come capture that info and they take it back. And we're trying to set up an academic hub where this information can be shared and the data can be utilized by local academics. So those are 2 very important areas. We launched this project at an event called APAC in Kigali. That was the one that we were thinking of in July. So what this concept, I'm not going to spend much time because it's a bit of a busy slide here, but Damien said I should actually put something like this up because he's a data king. And really what this is, to describe it, because it may be interesting, some of you might be involved. I heard that mining is quite big in Perth, or in this part of Aussie, yeah? So, I mean, data is key, obviously, when you talk about mining. So, and Esri might be something a lot of you are very used to. So what we're doing, and this is Craig Beach's baby, is we're building this data hub. It's baby steps for now, but we're linking the data that we're collecting, obviously GIS data, data is captured on the ground, multiple different data sources. We are posting it to, has everyone heard of What 3 Words? What 3 Words, an incredible new app that's come on the market in the last year. If you don't know about it, you need to spend some time understanding What 3 Words. What 3 Words does for us in conservation is it gives an address to every single 3 meter by 3 meter square on the Earth's surface. So we can start posting conservation-related data into those squares. We can also start giving communities that very often don't have an address. Their address might have been behind the baobab, by the river, that place, because that's the way communities have been. But we need to identify where they live if we're going to reward them for preserving biodiversity. So it helps us, What 3 Words helps us in those 2 ways. We've partnered with Esri. Esri they've got a wonderful model that they allow you to use the Esri conservation tools at no cost as long as you register with them and they do their due diligence on them, on you. Internet of Things, obviously, there's multiple ways to collect conservation-related data. Quite important, this little graphic in this, it's a distributed ledger technology that, not crypto, but distributed ledger technology that the academics work on to verify that the data we're collecting, similar system to they're using in carbon, to verify the data we're loading into this model is true. So we're at the early stages, but it's very exciting. And really what it's doing is this yellow line, this is the carrot. This is what we're saying, is if we're not driving, so much money is going into watching the anti-poaching, and you've got these incredible guys, military style, you've got incredible groups of women. We can't stop that. But we need to look at conservation differently. And I popped does everyone know what these are? SDG goals. If you don't know them, you need to get to know them, especially if you're in mining. These are going to be key things, okay? And we need to embrace them. They're global. They're going to be coming more and more onto your desk over the coming years. Those of you involved in the corporate world or any type of world where you're engaging with the environment and with communities, the SDGs are key. And so obviously we need to use those as a guideline, and then we need to transfer the encouragement back to these communities to preserve the wildlife and the nature that they're spending their lives with. Yeah. So it's a little bit of another busy slide. It really is talking about the partnership that we've got here with Oxford, Southern African Wildlife College, African Leadership University, Brian Child. Does anyone, his father was actually head of Zim Parks back in the day. Brian is very keen on the project. Might even get him back to Victoria Falls, hopefully. But we've got a current champion, a chap called Mike Musgrave. I don't know if I put him on there, but Mike is he's actually the MBA lead at African Leadership University. He's the MBA lead for conservation. So doing an MBA class, mainly with African students, studying conservation. So new ideas, like that type of idea that we're trying to push forward here. You've got these young, agile minds looking at conservation in a new way. Okay, so really that's my bit over. We're going to allow some time. Obviously, we want to get to some questions. We really want to give a huge thank you to the club here. But Mike, you took this thing. We chatted to you just before Christmas, and you took on the cudgel. Really appreciate you. Not just you. Obviously, there were others out there. Bill, Paul, Andrew. And said, no, let's do this thing. Let's get a presentation together. Jono, you put it up into the cricket group. Thank you very much indeed. Thank all of you for taking time out of your day to come down here. Like I say, we do not have the answers. We're far from it. We just realize that there is an absolute need for those people that care about what's happening back in Africa with the biodiversity, with the nature, and are prepared to understand that actually conservation is not about saving animals. It's about working on the relationship between the community or people and the wildlife. And preservation of biodiversity is really what's key. The elephant and the lions and the rhino will survive if we can preserve the habitat. That's for sure. We need to preserve that habitat. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all very much for coming.
Let's get on to the questions.
Do you have any difficulty with political opposition from the different countries that you operate in or are going to operate in?
So the way we get around that is we identify outreach partners that are legally established in the country that they work. So it's part of our due diligence is to make sure they operate legally within the structures of the country that they're in. There's a few other things, obviously, with your background, you understand we've got to check that, they're legitimate and they're running a decent set of books and so on within their own capabilities. Also that they have a mandate with the local community, but having a legal structure in the country that they operate. And I take an interesting case here. So we've actually got two of our outreach partners are from Angola. And one of them is an organization called Funda Chao, and I only actually met the chap when I was at APAC. Wonderful people that are actually based in Luanda. But the other is a chap called Steve Boys. I mentioned that, I think, to you earlier. So does anyone know who Steve Boys is here? Yeah, so, do yourselves a favor, again, write that name down, go back and look this guy up and watch some of his
into the Okavango.
into the Okavango stories. I mean, look, David Attenborough is a cool guy, but there are many cool guys out there, and you need to spend some time with these types of characters. Steve Boyes is doing an incredible job because he realizes one of the key things for our area, just like you were talking about earlier, is the water, the clean water that's coming into the system. And at the moment, probably about 30-40% of the water that's coming into not just the Zambezi, but the Okavango and the Kwando is coming out of Angola. And I mean, it's a dark area for all of us. None of us, again, maybe the mining companies are up there and, you know, leading the field and finding out what's going on. But this chap, Steve Boyes, has been the leader, and there's going to be more obviously following him. So follow that name.
Just in addition also to what you were saying. So Robin mentioned Kaza. Interesting to hear how few people know about it. But the Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, Kaza TFCA, is signed into by 5 governments.
Yeah.
And so there is a willingness on behalf of governments to act in the preservation of biodiversity, and as such, we fit into that.
How can you bring the whole carbon credits into this so that you get people using that as an incentive to get involved? Because that's a big step forward.
It is. We're not entirely sold on carbon credits. They're necessary, they're good, they've led the way, but we believe that there's another step to be done, and that's on, because carbon credits are quite clunky. You get them traded outside of Africa. Large portions of those funds get lost. They don't, you know, we're talking about retaining 10% of our funds. Carbon credits, you've got, people are seeing carbon credits almost like another oil strike, you know, if you can secure the carbon credits on an area. So we're a little concerned about carbon credits. There's some really legitimate companies that are doing an incredible job, but we believe that the movement is towards biodiversity credits, and something I look forward to chatting to you more about. Yeah.
Can I just make a comment?
Please.
You asked that question, Mike. In the old days, there used to be a thing called RED, Reduced
Yep.
Environmental Degradation.
And it's still there.
Still there.
That's where we think for Africa. We've got in Perth, we've got one of the leading fixed-wing aircraft data capture systems, Outline Global. You know, Ross
Wow.
Lilly. You should have been here tonight. But if we can actually identify the areas that are woodland already, and we can work out how much carbon they are sucking out of the atmosphere every day. Now they're doing this in Borneo now, and we've got people who will actually fund upfront 20% of the credits that not related to planting, but to stop those areas being pulled out. If you can identify the height of the trees and the density, we can work out how much carbon gets sucked out. So the biggest carbon sink is Congo and Borneo and Amazon. But believe me, those big forests in the Okavango have huge lungs, and they can suck a lot of CO2 out and create a lot of oxygen.
And not just the trees, but also the actual vegetation. Yeah.
Now, if we can actually do that biodiversity mosaic, which is what you're talking about, that's the biodiversity, not just the trees and plants.
Frogs, scorpions, the whole lot.
That's it.
This is what Outline Global do. They've just done 12,500 kilometers for one of the big 4.
Wow.
Because on their mine sites, they want to know exactly who's on there, trying to, Georgia their gold and all the rest of it. But if you can, and it's down to 10 centimeters. So we can identify heights of trees, we can identify.
Is this a LoRa? What's
No, it's better than LoRa. This is like Esri.
Okay.
But from a fixed wing plane that gives you 3D.
So we must definitely, we'd love to chat some more. Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions? Mum?
Have we behaved?
It's not really a question, it's just an observation. Going into the Invic Falls, going into the park, which actually is not really in any way separated from the road. I mean, the girls going to school, elephants stopping them on the road, because that's what Vic Falls is. But I do remember once going in and saying, right, you go through this room and you go through there. obviously they can't have a fence around the whole place. But you go in there and you pay the woman, and she said, the elephants, they are such a pest in the township.
Yeah.
Because they are coming over and eating all the things.
Yeah, that's exactly, Mum. I mean, elephants are seen, we love them and so on, but, you know, unless we create a value chain for these animals, you know, the elephants' time is, you know, humans are more important. So if we're not able to come up with a transparent and sustainable way that's homegrown in Africa, that's what we believe is important to a lot of this. And one of the reasons we're a little concerned about carbon credits is because they are controlled and imposed in a lot of ways outside. So we think that there's an opportunity in there to look at things a little bit differently. And by no means that we're not the only ones. There's a lot of people, you know, looking at similar things. Jono.
Yeah, Robert, how would you rate the biodiversity of the Zambezi Valley and how it's changed over the last 30 years in very broad terms?
I'm only here for a couple of days. Luke's here. But Jono, yeah, on a broad stroke, those countries have done an incredible job. You know, we can throw stones as much as we like about the Zimbabwean government, Angolans, or whatever, whether it's through default or through intentional work. These countries have preserved the habitats out there pretty well to where we are now. The problem with wealth is, unfortunately, you know, in Africa, wealth is about how many cattle you've got, how many kids you've got, and so on. So with the internet and so on, we're going to see the threat coming faster and harder into our part of Africa. And that's why we believe, you know, just doing anti-poaching and continually to fund anti-poaching is not going to be the panacea.
And just to add to that, John, why we spoke so much about, you know, what, you know, we all look back at Africa and we say, what a mess. But actually, why I spoke about the megafauna index, so when you look at that, I mean, that is verified globally. It's indisputable that we have 7 out of the top 10 in the world in Africa. So it's still there. It's being preserved somehow. What we need to do is support that and amplify that, and then create value through data which gives power to people on the ground, and create power for people on the ground through education. And that's why we've picked education and data as 2 broad sector approaches to take forward, so that Africa can own a narrative and benefit from it, but the stick is obviously still needs to be there.
Peaks.
When you're looking at your data, how would you want to call it there?
Yeah.
And you're talking about the data that you're exposing to people. There's an opportunity to monetize a lot of that as well, to help feed back into your system.
Exactly.
So I'm keen to chat about that.
Yeah, good. I mean, we could have another look at that, Peaks, but that's it. When you started talking about that blend of data that you are working on, it's very, very interesting. And this is the type of thing, I mean, I'm sure it will come out, you know, what can you do? You're here across 10 hours flight away from Australia, but what can you do? The world is a small place now. And, you know, as you did, you know, said, right, how can we help? Let's spread the word. But how do we take it forward from there? And we believe that Australia, you know, is an opportunity to centralize a movement here in Perth, because you're closest to Africa. There's also a lot of like-minded people here, and ex-Zimbabweans, ex-Zambians, South Africans, and so on that are here. So there may well be an opportunity for us to sow a seed and grow an infrastructure that can work with us in the months and years to come. We'd love that. So you would love to hear, you know, in the coming months, if there's any feedback on that.
I was just wanting to speak about the conservancies. Have you got any links with the conservancies in Zimbabwe? I used to work for the Namibia Nature Foundation, and we started the conservancy program throughout Namibia, which has become a very successful program in handing back the game to the
local communities. Yeah,
it's protected huge areas, and saved a lot of the habitat and thus the animals. Do you see yourselves linking in with the Conservancy program? I think it has spread into Zimbabwe as well.
Well, Savi Valley Conservancy is world known, and it's a very successful model. It got hit quite badly during the farm issues in 2000, but it's withstood that. And the government has actually been quite encouraging in supporting the rights of the operators, both private sector, community and government areas within that conservancy. So we think that what you're saying, and absolutely Namibia, and we have partners in Namibia. Yeah. So we work closely with an organization called NAXO, which is representative of the local communities there. But this is the type of thing, is to learn, take the successes in Namibia, you know, some that might be here, and then go and trial these in Zambia or in Angola.
I'm surprised to see that the Namibia Nature Foundation isn't part of one of your partners.
What we've been remiss in doing is not communicating enough with our outreach partners. So what we did is we stopped recruiting outreach partners when we got to a stage where we thought, crikey, we need to actually pull back here, because we can't actually supply them with too much just yet. Yeah. Apart from verbal support and saying, we're going to do this, and too many promises. So we've actually capped it, and we've said, look, you know, let's put things on hold until we can set up our infrastructure. And but we know about them, and we have a very, very strong partner there.
Yeah, and Tristan Cowley, I don't know if you know him, but he runs a safari operation in Namibia, does an enormous amount of work. But I'm so glad you brought up Namibia, and would love to talk to you more. Number one, megafauna index, 60% preserved in Namibia because of the conservancies. Incredible success model, and definitely, obviously the countries are different, the governments are different, the politics are different. But if we can assist, and that is it, broad sector. And definitely we've spoken about conservancies in Zimbabwe and people
absolutely. And in Kenya it's the same thing, you know, there's a Rangelands Trust there, very successful developments taking place in the northern part of Kenya along the same lines. And it's Namibia has got a very low population, and so is Botswana. It's been one of the key things. I mean, Jono, you know, it's not just those countries. You know, Zimbabwe has got 16 million people, or we don't know, maybe a few million in South Africa, but you know, it's still the population's quite low when you look at other parts of the world. So it's again one of the reasons why it's been a relative success. You know, as we say, you know, things are going to evolve, and we need to be ready for that.
Robin, can I ask an obvious one? Is our friend Mr. Pocock, who's now a senator, is very, very vocal and very much part of Save the Rhino.
And they have a community project in the Lowveld in Zim.
Is he a champion for you guys?
Not yet.
Are you going across there?
No, we've been remiss probably in not even knocking on his door as yet. Just, you know, we felt obviously, you know, he's already involved in conservation, but he's been hell of a busy in his politics side here.
His brothers in Zim have got a 70,000 hectare, you would know that.
Yeah, in the Lowveld, yeah, which they're growing. Yeah.
I just thought they might. He's not a bad advocate.
Definitely on the radar. We don't have a direct link.
I've got one through his dad.
That's because you only get Springbok captains up there. You've got to get an Australian captain.
When they get into the top three, Mike, then maybe.
He'll come and captain one of those games at before. I can guarantee you.
Yeah, and those games, we want to make those conservation games. We'd like to take them to a more physical, not the wrestling physical, but it's certainly not with Pocock. But you know, instead of just online stuff, you know, get people to meet and get champions from all around the world involved. Yeah, a few more triathletes from other parts of the world. Gareth,
there's a question here.
That's been very good information and everything session that you've given us. But what do you exactly see that Perth as us can contribute towards the whole thing?
Yeah, you know, that we don't know. It's early days. We just see potential in people at the very least that can spread the word. learn a little bit more about the area back there and spread the word. The best case scenario, speaking openly, would be to establish a structure here with some people that are saying, hang on, we actually want to do something, get a lawyer, an accountant, and start a framework here. We can supply the information, and we start trying to raise some substantial funding across here in Australia, not just in Western Australia. But yeah, it's a great question. What can we do? The thing is that, we've only got 4 brain cells. With you, we've got 8. So we need to spread the load. We don't have all the answers, but we're just sowing seeds, really.
Yeah, we're looking for suggestions. We're presenting information, but we want participation. And like Robin says, we've set up a 501c3. We're nearly through the process of getting our charity set up in the UK. We've set up a Mauritian foundation. You can imagine the due diligence it took to get those set up, but we've done those. We could do the same in Australia, but then we need help. We need people to sit on boards. We need people to be workers in there, spare time. There's lots of volunteer work going on over here, so maybe it could be part of that. There's tax incentives for people that want to donate.
The Mauritian one is slightly different in that the reason we set up in Mauritius is because it's part of SADC. It's a lot easier to move funding to our outreach partners from Mauritius, and it's a lot easier to move funding from the US or the UK to Mauritius. So we've employed a foundation company in Mauritius. There's obviously a huge threat to raising substantial funding as you're reporting. So we've engaged a foundation management company in Mauritius that'll, for direct costs to the volume of funding that we channel through there, do the reporting. They're called Ocorian, and again, if you're interested in that type of thing, learning more, what we've done with our US and UK trust is we've taken the trustees from the UK and the US and the UK and put them through to sit on that foundation. So we've got continuity. And wherever else we were to establish partnerships with organizations, we would draw trustees into that foundation in Mauritius. So we have the accountability and the confidence of the people that you may be in Australia be able to help us raise funds.
The other way that you can help, come out for a holiday. And whilst you're out there, have a look and see for yourself what's happening on the ground. Go and meet some of the outreach partners. Spend some money on a safari. It will go to the right places. It's a bit of a conflict of interest because we're in a safari business. You don't have to book through our safari business, but I think you get the picture. Like, don't just leave, don't leave Africa behind completely. We understand why we need to come over here, but don't leave it behind completely. Look back. There's hope.
Paula?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could give us an example. Say the UK, your structure, your core team that sort of provides your operation or whatever in the UK. What would that be made up of?
So we have currently 3 trustees in the UK. A chap who's insurance, he's a retired insurance company head, and another chap who's a Botswanan that used to be in Knight Frank in cabs. He's now living in the UK. So they've been the core, and then Joe, who lives in the UK, is a secretary of that. So the reason we've kept it small is so that we can get the infrastructure set up. What we've been fortunate with is we've had a link to an advocacy organization called A4ID. Advocates they support not-for-profit organizations. They did a due diligence on us, and they're helping us establish ourselves in the UK. As Luke says, we haven't actually got our charitable status there yet, which is
there's hefty fees and due diligence. Setting up a charity in the UK is anything from 12 to 18 months, and it's become more difficult through COVID. But A4ID, as Robin says, we met through United for Wildlife network, and they are huge for us because it's a group of lawyers that straight away do their due diligence and say, okay, these guys are shasha, let's move ahead. Yeah. And they save us a huge amount of money in the setup. In the US, we were fortunate. We had a donor that said, believe in what you're doing, I'm paying the fees. And we got that set up, and there's a board that's been appointed there. So the structures are there, but we're looking for help in the US now to try and make that.
Yeah, I'd be remiss for not thanking John here, who's came on at an early stage during the Conservation Games and started supporting our organization with a monthly contribution, which we really appreciate at such an early stage as well. But and I know that you've done some initial work, in it's not so easy here, establishing that. It's going to take some time and some investigation.
I was just going to ask Robin, so do you also have like fundraising managers and marketing managers and let's say relationship managers, managers, those sort of people?
We are going to have, and currently you're looking at them, because all of this work, we've got a very, very tight team. We've got fortunately a couple of salaries covering some of the Data Hub staff in Vic Falls. But we've got all of us are running on a pro bono basis at the moment, and even the funding that's gone in obviously has come from donations to get us this far. So we haven't, but yeah, absolutely, that's absolutely required, and setting up that infrastructure is key.
Operating model, right?
Yeah, so important, so important.
We have a business plan that we've developed, and very happy to send it to you and get some input. Yeah.
I think if we can talk about one of the challenges that we've faced, because we've bitten off such a big, broad landscape approach, and we haven't just picked one area, or hey, we're going to be anti-poaching, or we're going to be veterinary. We said, look, this is what we want to do, and guys are sort of saying, whoa, that's big. How do we plug in? And it is a difficult question to sometimes answer and to paint for people, but it's on purpose. Everyone should see themselves in a role somehow in this. That's why it's an alliance. It's not about just having a few guys with titles. It's
Before we go and have a drink, and I think that would be great, there's one organization in the Valley called Tashinga Initiative. Now, it's a great example of how we can help these organizations. So we've worked with them to establish a budget for about 4 or 5 projects. And then we'd look to take those projects, put them in a bit of a sexy format, and add the pictures and so on, and take those and send them out to the markets that we're building. And people can select, it's not just money goes in and, you don't know where it goes. And I know, John, for you, it's had to be one of those to get to where we are now. But ultimately, it's going to be a lot of the funding. People will say, look, I would like to support this one of your outreach partners. What are they doing this year? And then we would produce the material that some of you may know Lynn Taylor, but she is an absolute champion and has been hugely impactful and effective partnering with national parks in the Valley. So,
she immediately needs a couple of Land Rovers. She needs support for her rangers. She's got a list of things. So if guys want to see some money go somewhere straight away, here's a place you can see it. Any more questions? If not, I think we will offer some measly drinks at the bar.
Well done.